Hi folks listening. I'm going to start this up in a minute. Just getting my ducks in a row. Probably one of the more complicated lectures this week in the whole sequence in this class. Let's start it up. Boy, I've got a lot to talk about today. Oh my goodness. So many slides. I cut a lot last night and they feel like they've multiplied since then in the night. Slides in the night. Multiplying. I've got my experimental P5JS file organized. Staying for the reference. I got my lecture. Got that. A list of stuff. I'm going to press record. And I'm going to start it up. Good morning, folks. Welcome to another exciting week here in COMP1720/6720 Art and Interaction Computing. Today it's my favorite topic of the entire course, sound and music computing. And if you can hear the excitement in my voice, it's perhaps not because I'm that excited about the topic, although I am. It's that because I'm excited about the topic, I want things to be really good, and I have high expectations on myself, which sometimes is a negative thing. I'm starting it up, so hopefully there's people watching. I can see analytics. I've got 0 viewers on the stream. Oh well. I've got a dozen or so viewers on YouTube, which is cool. I'm going to leave my Teams window here open so that folks can chat to me if you've got questions during the lecture. But someone's done something on the team. Let's go to my team. Oh, it's just a heart. Well, thank you for whoever hearted it. A hearty heart back at you. Turn on my little tablet. Good morning, Nat. Good to have at least one person here in the team saying hello. Admin Corner. Before we get into the exciting topic of sound and music computing, let's talk about admin. What's going on in the course? Folks, you know that assignment 2 is due next Monday. It is here on the website. We've been talking about this for a little while now. I'm starting to get a few questions on the forum about it. A few pokes of an idea. Hi, Yi, morning. The assignment is to create an interactive workstation of some sort in P5. There's a lot up to you in this assignment. I haven't given you a sample to work off, and it's a bit more abstract because you're designing an interaction, a bit more abstract than assignment 1. Again, I don't think that this is that complicated an assignment. Your idea is to imagine a workspace of any task. It could be an imagined one, it could be kids' toys, it could be just something that's some representation of a real thing, spaceship controls, a truck's steering wheel and gear shifter, an artist's toolbox, any kind of workstation. Draw it in P5, make things interact, and make sure that by interacting you're giving some enjoyment or deeper understanding to the user. So that's the concept behind this assignment. I know that we've only really started to think about interactions last week, but that's why I want you to take what we talked about and try to put it into practice so that I can give you feedback on it, and my tutors can give you feedback on how you are doing and how you're conceptualizing interaction in your work. And so because you get this chance to practice, it means that your interactive art at the end of the course, the major project, will be that much better. So hopefully folks are really getting into this and enjoying the chance to make something interactive. It should be enjoyable. All of the assignments in this course, they're like the assignments I would dream of doing. I'm trying to make assignments that you want to do, that are fun, but also challenge you a little bit by pushing you in a certain direction. And the certain direction here is to really think about what your interaction is. Again, due 2100, 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 5th of September, which is Monday. That's the first day of the mid-semester break, so you get this weekend and that Monday day to get that in, and we'll look at it. Assignment 1 is now marked, completed, marked, and we're just about to sign those marks away. I'll just have to have a little look this afternoon to approve them, and then I'll return the feedback to you by the end of the day today. So you'll get your feedback on your monster, and hopefully you can use that feedback to adjust course with what you're doing in assignment 2 if needed. But from looking at the discourse posts about your assignment 1, about your monsters, the pre-labs from last week, can I say that I was mightily impressed with the large variety of creative ideas that folks came up with and all of the different personalities people had expressed in their monsters. So by and large, it was a really impressive assignment. A lot of folks doing great work. I'll post on the forum about that. You may also know from another admin corner mention, we did have a forum, a feedback survey, week 4 and 5 feedback survey. I've got the results from that, and I'm just going to sort those out. Again, I'll post on the forum when I have something to tell you about it, but they'll also be in discussion with your course reps. Some something that they get to know about and use that feedback to try to help you as well. So, where are we now? Week 6. Folks, where are we up to in this course? We've spent the last 6 weeks learning about how to code in P5 and JavaScript simultaneously. And we've now covered the coding topics. So you know about arrays, you know about objects, you know about loops, you know about control structures, if then else, you know about variables, you know about functions, and you know about flow. This is all you need to know about programming in this course, but we do need to learn some more about how to use P5 in different ways. And so I've got a number of topics from here until the end of the semester, which are all about different kinds of art, different kinds of interactive art, and how you can make that in P5 with the coding tools you already have. And as we go along, we will interact more or touch up against more of the programming topics. So you thought we've been using functions so far. We've known what an object is, and we've known that some objects have functions associated with them. But today we'll have to use that skill a lot when we're using a lot of functions and objects within P5, because today's topic uses more detailed features of P5 where you need to keep track of things and use further interactions with those objects that you're keeping track of. So it's all about practicing your skills in coding, practicing your skills in creative arts, creativity and design, and looking at different topics. And the first topic we're looking at is sound. Sound. And I know people love to put sound in their sketches in this class. But my job is to make sure that you're doing it creatively and that you're doing it in a way which is going to enhance your artwork and not make it worse. Because sound is a little bit dangerous. Sounds a little bit dangerous. So, here's the question to start with. Why should you, a code artist, care about sound? Why should you, a code artist, care about sound? Well, here's the deal. Sound demands attention. If I put a piece of art, a painting on my wall, and someone walks by it, they might see it, or they might not, and they might just keep walking, okay? And it almost doesn't matter what kind of painting it is. I suppose you could imagine for yourself, I'll let you imagine for yourself, a painting of something, a subject, which would grab the attention of 95% of people. And obviously advertising is a good example of ways that people try to grab attention, but it's not, you can still zone it out, right? Okay, keep that idea in your head. What if I set off the fire alarm in my building at 3 o'clock in the morning? Are there any people in the building who you think are able to ignore the fire alarm? No, sound works different to vision. We can ignore something we see or just put it in our peripheral vision and just focus on something else. But if there's a very annoying, loud sound, you can't ignore it. It's impossible, which is why they design fire alarms to be the most annoying, excruciating sound you can think of. Another thought, what about the sound of a crying baby, a very young crying baby? It's a sound which is biologically designed, evolutionarily created to demand humans' attentions, because little tiny babies can't look after themselves. They need attention from grown-ups. And so their cries get us in a way in our brain where we just cannot unhear it, and you must attend. And of course, obviously the parents of such child are probably attending to it, but everybody else around it, imagine a child crying on a plane, everyone else around it is already like feeling like they have to do something or can't focus on anything else. Sound demands attention in a way that vision doesn't. Sound also communicates something in a different way to vision. It communicates emotion sometimes at a more subtle level. You have to be subtle with sound because you can't draw a picture, you can't represent things like you can with images, but it can communicate emotion very effectively. Sound can enhance realism, so if you've got some scene and you want to feel like people are inside that scene or feeling that it's real, then you can certainly use sounds to add an extra layer of reality on top of that or around it. Sound can also provide feedback. So there's something about the way that sound links in with our body, such that if you make a move with your mouse or hit a key on a keyboard and there's a little sound that comes after it, you feel like you've done something in a more effective way than if you were just not. And I'm going to make an analogy to games. I know I've said that games aren't the same as interactive art. We've gone through that discussion last week. But if you've got like a sword in a game and you go around chopping things and it makes no sound, you kind of feel like you're not doing anything. But if it goes every time with a little whoosh sound, you feel like you're using the sword in a way that you might not be. And if you're going and then you walk up to a wall and it goes clank, 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 you feel like the wall is there. But if you go up to the wall and it still goes, you feel like you're not up to the wall yet. So sometimes they don't even animate the wall changing the way that the sword moves. They just make it go clank, and you feel like you've still hit the wall, even if the animation hasn't changed. So what are the sounds of this? You can see this image and you can hear it in your head, right? The sound of an ambulance, sound of traffic, the sound of air or rain if there's a lot of weather. It's a very vivid image in terms of your visual understanding, but it's also vivid in terms of what you can hear in your mind's ear, shall we say, about this scene. Something more abstract, maybe a scary scene. You can imagine that there would be a soundtrack going along with this, something creepy, some sounds of the environment that are maybe like a quiet outside noises, maybe an owl hooting in the distance, a creaky door, the little sound of the weird, creepy tricycle. So you can communicate emotions in a scene or the tone of a scene through the sounds that you choose to put with it. And this slide says, this is an object you wouldn't know what it is because you're all too little these days, but this is known as an iPod, and it was a device that folks of my age used in about 2002, I suppose, to play sound. And the point of this slide is to say that sound is really important to people. So this is an image of an iPod where someone's got carrying their sounds around with them. They're carrying all the albums they love. The point of the iPod, which was so great, was you could finally carry around a huge library of audio, and it was all about curating the audio that you really like to hear. This person's not only just got an iPod, they've also got a specific amp to make it sound better and some really cool headphones. Wow, they look great. What are these? AKG K701s. Looks like a really cool set of headphones. So they've really put a lot of effort into their audio environment. So sound is something which is important to people. And so we've got to get it right. We don't want to have sound that sounds bad, because the weird thing about sound is, as I said before, the first thing and the last thing, you can't avoid it. So if you make bad sound, everyone's going to know about it. It's hard to avoid bad sound. And I guess it's something which is important to me because I'm a musician, so I think a lot about how sound and audio works, but it's also going to be important to you in your work, because as a preview, assignment 3, as I've got a preview down here, assignment 3 is to create an abstract sonic artwork. So this one's not, I haven't finished the assignment specification here. I think I need to read this again and make sure it's working. I think I'll probably try to tighten this one up today. The template's not available yet. You can see the due date here is not for quite a while, not until the 4th of October. But the goal of this assignment is to really focus on sound. So that's a big challenge. So make sure you're listening today, because I explain all the details. I might do some more next week, some more sound, because I love sound. What kind of sounds can we have? There are lots of types of sounds. I guess we've got musical sounds, so we can definitely play music. That's a kind of sound. There's abstract sounds, so there might be sounds which are not exactly a piece of music, but they're not exactly something out of the real world either. Like just a tone playing. Is it music? Maybe it could be treated as music, but it might just be by itself a tone, or noise, or a whooshing sound, or a descending tone. Things that don't necessarily create a piece of music, but they just sort of exist out in the world. And then you might have sounds which relate to the real world. And in the world of gaming, they're often called diegetic sounds. What's the definition of diegetic sound? It's a sound that occurs within the context of a story and able to be heard by the characters. So there's sounds that we, the audience, hear. So the background music of a movie is sounds that the audience hears, but we don't expect the characters are hearing music while they're doing their stuff. Like while the hobbits are running to Isengard, there's no they're not hearing the soundtrack by Howard Shore in their ears, and all the orcs aren't hearing that. Those are just for the audience. But when there are swords clanging or thunder in the sky, those are sounds we expect the characters to hear. So that's the diegetic sound. It's sound within the story. There's other ways to put that. You can call it sound effects or skeuomorphic sounds, which are sounds representing a real thing. It's a bit of a weird word, not used that much these days. It was popular about 10 years ago to use that word, but I don't see it very much these days. So different kinds of sounds. And really, this is not a music course, so I don't expect people to be composing music in their sketches. I expect you to be creating maybe some abstract sounds that thematically relate to what you're doing or provide some background, and perhaps make some sound effects relating to the interaction which represent what's going on. And I'll show some ways today about how to do that. So a few thoughts now about creating sound in a sketch. Sound is something that requires time, so you can't have a static sketch with sound. It doesn't connect. Sound is always changing over time, and we need to always, from this point forward in the course, think about how we interact with these sounds. So our sound should be related to what the people are doing who are interacting with our artwork. So we need to choose, when we're doing our sonic interaction design, we need to choose what sound to make. We want to choose when it should start and when it should stop. And we'd like to choose the properties of this sound. So some properties might be, is it a high sound or a low sound in terms of pitch? Is it loud or quiet? Maybe we're applying some effects or combining it with other sounds in some way. So there's different properties of sound that we can change. A few bits of sound lingo. Again, not a music course, but these are basic properties of sound that I expect people to be able to understand when I talk about them. So just some quick definitions. The pitch of a sound is whether it's high or low. And we measure that pitch in hertz in computing. Not exactly in terms of note names like A, B, C, D, E, F, G if you're thinking about music. But very low could be something like 40 hertz, low bass rumble. That's kind of borderline what you can actually hear. To the upper borderline of our hearing is about 20 kilohertz, high-pitched buzz. The volume of a sound, another way to put that is the amplitude of a sound. And so we can think of sound as having a wave. Here's a sine wave through, whoops, that's black, I don't want black, I want red. Sine wave through time. And the number of peaks in a time period would be representing the pitch, and how high this wave gets and how low it gets is the amplitude. And that controls how loud it sounds in our ears. So amplitude or loudness, and usually within computer music, computer sound and audio, we change amplitude between 0, silence, and 1.0, full volume. So we have a range of different amplitudes we can choose. Time, the time component. Well, pitch is related to time, but we have another kind of time, a more longer term time, which is the length of a sound. So not the length of each peak in the waveform, but the length of the whole sound happening. And we call that the duration. So we can have long or short durations, and we tend to measure this in seconds in sound and music computing, not in terms of, I guess, musical durations, like quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. You could set those up, but basically in computer sound, we would look at seconds to start with. And a final thing we'll think about is this concept called timbre. So there's multiple ways to describe this. It's either called timbre, or it's called sound color, or it's called Klangfarbe, which means sound color in German. And it's hard to describe concepts sometimes, but it makes sense by analogy. It's the quality or color of a sound that lets us understand the difference between different kinds of sounds. So if you heard a piano playing a note middle C, you would hear that sound and be like, that's a piano. If you heard a saxophone playing the same note, you would hear that note, even though it's the same pitch, and you would say, that's a saxophone. And there would be no human being in my class listening to this right now who would in any way make a mistake between hearing a piano and a saxophone. If you heard this piano, you would 100% say piano. If you heard the saxophone, you would 100% say that's a saxophone. Why? Why can we tell the difference between different instruments even when they're playing the same pitch? Because there are other qualities to sound, about different sounds that make up the sound, even though they're the same pitch. And those qualities we bundle all together and call timbre. So it's the quality of sound that lets us tell the difference between instruments, even though they're playing the same pitch. Some instruments that are very close together, you might get a bit confused, like if it's a baritone saxophone or an alto saxophone playing the same pitch, right at the top of the baritone saxophone range or right at the bottom of the alto saxophone range. An expert might be able to tell the difference. Maybe you might not be able to. I probably wouldn't be able to, even though, unless I saw it, because a baritone saxophone is huge and an alto saxophone is small. Someone who's a wind instruments expert will jump in the chat and say, there's no common note between an alto saxophone and a baritone, but maybe there is. I just made it up an example. But definitely piano and violin, very different. Piano, violin and xylophone, you would easily be able to tell the difference. A huge bell, a church bell, and a tuba, you'd be able to tell the difference very easily. Completely different timbre, even though they might be able to play the same pitch. So these different sound words. So this is what we've got to choose, and we've got to get P5 to do this for us. What, when, how high, how loud. Different choices. So here's the what bit, timbre. In computer music, and in P5, we're going to say that there are basically two ways to make a sound. One way is to create the sound from scratch using maths. And that way we're going to call synthesis, creating a sound from scratch. Another way is to play back a sound that you've recorded. And we're going to call that sampling. So a sample is a sound that's been recorded in the real world. And these are both great ways to make a sound. And in fact, in your assignment, assignment 3, you're required to explore both of them in at least one example. I like assignments because I can just make people do what I want, to make you learn. That's my job, is to make you learn. Some people call it teaching. I might call it making you learn. The way these work in P5 are similar, but have some slight differences because of the way that the library works. And we're going to look at a library in this, or a part of P5 called p5.sound in this lecture, which is sort of a subset of P5, but it's quite big and it gets its own area of the reference. So if you go to p5.sound, it has its own sub area. All of these different things. We'll talk about some of these today. So let's have a look at these two examples. Synthesis. We basically start with a mathematical function that gives us a simple uppy-downy pattern over time. So here's one of the uppy-downy patterns that I drew earlier on the screen, the sine tone. And that will make a very smooth tone. Ooh. Then over here, we have another uppy-downy pattern. So this one starts out at 1 and then goes straight down to -1 or 0, depending on where your axes are at some point, and then goes straight back up to 1. That's a square tone. That's going to be a very buzzy sound. Bzzz. Then we've got a triangle tone, which will be somewhere in between ooh and zzz. And then a sawtooth wave, which will also be a little bit more towards the buzz. This one goes up and down in straight lines, but it looks a bit smoother. And the sawtooth wave goes up in a line and then drops suddenly down to there. So we can represent these tones with maths. The sine tone, you can easily represent with like sine t over time, where t is like, an increasing number. If you just keep increasing that number, sine will go up and down between 1 and 0. And you could invent some other mathematical functions that would generate these other functions. Sampling, we need to record something. And I've got a picture of an expensive sound recorder. And I could say you all have to go out and buy a sound recorder. But in fact, you've already all got a sound recorder because you've all got your phone. So you may record sounds and use them in your sketches that you record in your phone. I've got an iPhone here, and if I go to voice memos, I've got all of these little sounds that I've recorded as voice memos. And in fact, I've got some sounds here that are sounds that I recorded on the 24th of September 2014, which was the first week that I gave this lecture. Sorry, just a moment. Whoops, sorry for the interruption. The first week I gave this lecture, I recorded this sound, and it's called Unilodge. Just put it near my microphone. I was just walking around ANU campus, and that was the sound from around what was the first Unilodge that was built on campus on Childer Street. And then I recorded something, some air conditioning systems on ANU campus, and down near the old bar. This was the old Union Court. So I can use my phone to just walk around and find sounds around the environment and use those in my sketch, which is what I'll be doing a little bit later in the lecture. Control. So we've got lots of options about how to control both synthesized and sampled sounds. We could be controlling these directly through an input device. We might schedule controls in time ahead of us. We might connect events in the sketch, so if some object in the sketch moves, maybe it creates a sound. We could be creating changes in our sounds randomly over time. We've got lots of options. We'll explore some of them today, and you will get to explore them in your labs starting in week 7, I believe. A few other concepts of sound. The pitch. We often think of pitch as the most important part of music. It's not. The most important thing is duration. I'm a percussionist though, so I would think that. But pitch can also communicate other things, the size of something or the mood of something. So if you hear a very small tune, a very high tune, you think of a small character, right? And if you think of something like dun 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 dun, so something slow and low, you think of a very big lumbering character, like a huge elephant or something. So you can communicate stuff about your sketch, stuff about your artwork, other aspects of it that you want the participant to hear or see or understand. You communicate it through sound. Amplitude, you can use changes in loudness to build tension or give some accents. You can also use it to create the relative importance of different things in your sketch. It's something which is important to play with in your work because, again, sound is hard to escape. And if you want something to stand out in sound, you should make it louder than the other sounds that you've got going on. You could create different kinds of interactions by connecting sound inputs to actions on the screen. You connect mouse, keyboard and mouse, the camera. Different aspects of your sketch could be connected to sound, and you could actually imagine your work as some kind of musical instrument. And in fact, this is a research topic for me. I work in a field called new interfaces for musical expression. So creating new kinds of musical instruments with computers. And I have a little video here from folks at a conference I go to, the New Interfaces for Musical Expression conference. You can have a look at this in your own time, but I will just skip to some cool examples of different instruments people have made. Where's a cool one? Well, it's just a band. Here we go. So this guy's made some kind of instrument with huge pieces of wood. Then we've got these gloves, Imogen Heap, quite a famous pop singer, performing with gloves that she's designed in collaboration with other artists and professionals. Ollie Bound, Australian sound artist, working with different objects. This guy's just playing drums, that's not new. This is one I like a lot. Portable new electronic instruments developed by these students. Anyway, you can look at the video later. I want to get to the bit where we do some coding, so I'm going to skip it for now. So let's make some sounds, some synthesis in P5, some sampling in P5, and we'll get to some interactive music as well. So how do we do this? How do we code it up? Well, we have to understand before we start that sound is different to graphics, sadly. When we say frame rate in our sketches, we're talking about the number of times per second that our P5 code goes through the draw function. And often that will be probably a number like 60. Has anyone seen the frame rate of their sketches? Sometimes there's a way in P5 to print out your frame rate, but when you've got a P5 sketch, we're looping over and over and over again through this draw loop here. And every time we do that, that counts as one frame, drawing the frame. So it might happen 60 or 30 times per second. 60 times per second is probably good. 30 times might be a little bit slow these days. We'd like it to be faster. So what's the frame rate for sound? Frame rate for video is 60 or 30. Frame rate for sound, is it 60 or 30? It's actually not. Rather than 30 frames per second, for sound, we expect something like 44,000 frames per second. Otherwise it doesn't work. If you only had 30 frames per second for sound, it wouldn't be sound. It wouldn't hear it. Everything would be so, all the pitch would be too low. You couldn't represent sounds that quick, sounds that we want to hear with a frame rate like that. It would make sound, you could represent sound, but it would be very low sounds only. So to cover our range of hearing, we basically need a frame rate for sound which is double the highest sound we expect to be able to hear. And there's mathematical reasons for that, but the highest sound we expect to be able to hear is about 20 kilohertz. So we need to have a frame rate of about 40 kilohertz to cover it. And in fact, in music, sometimes people would just like to have a much higher frame rate just in case, because they hope to represent sounds that humans can't hear, and they have reasons that might be a good idea. So sometimes we even go further than 44,000 frames per second to something like 96,000 hertz. But this is the typical frame rate, 44,000 hertz. And in your sketches, another problem, actually, in your P5 artwork so far, if your frame rate gets a bit slow, maybe it goes from 60 to 30 to 25 for a second, then goes back to 30, it might look a little bit choppy, or you might not even notice it. It might be acceptable. But if the sound changes frame rate, the way that we generate sounds doesn't work, and it's really obvious. So the sound needs to have an absolutely set frame rate. We agree on what it is to start with. 44,000 is a typical choice. That's the frame rate of CD quality audio, which was sort of decided as a basic quality for audio in the 80s. We decide that and we need to stick to it. So things for sound work a little bit differently. You don't get a draw loop for sound, for instance. You have to make sound in a different way. So 44,000 versus 60, that's a huge difference, 735 times difference. So when we do make sound in P5, we can't use a draw loop or a draw sound loop to directly program each frame of sound. That would be way too slow. So P5.sound provides us some building blocks, which are just objects, and we put these together and modify them to create our sounds. So what we got to do is load up the p5.sound library into our index.html, which will already be done in your examples in the labs. But for now, I'm just looking in my example here and just confirming I've got here loading in p5. This is the bit of my index.html file which loads p5. And in this part, I'm loading in p5.sound. So that should work with sound. This is my little example for the day. I've got my sketch and I've got some sound files, including the Unilodge sound file I played before, already loaded up and ready to go for some experiments. So what building blocks are available? Two main ones. A source which produces a sound, so it could either play a sound file or create a sine wave, and a processor that just processes sounds. So these might add an effect or change the volume or do something over time. Anything we need to do to change that sound file. And we need to use those two things together to make things that sound like interesting sound and music. To design sound, we have to not just produce it, but process it. So here's a synth example. Very simple synthesis. Let's plug this in. Let OSC, I'll make another window, editor.p5.js.org. Put these ones in, just check that this already has p5.sound activated. Good. So let's look at this bit of code together. First thing we do is create a variable, let OSC, OSC. OSC is a short for oscillator in computer music, and oscillator is going to be our basic sound building block for synthesizing sounds. So our oscillator object, OSC equals new p5 oscillator. This is the first time we're creating an object using this new command. Interesting that we haven't needed to do that yet, but when you're in JavaScript, there's several ways of creating an object. One of the ways we saw before was just using those curly brackets, but this time we're using an object which is defined in the p5 library, and we're getting JavaScript to set it up for us, so we use the new command to give us a new version of that object. So OSC is going to be a new p5.oscillator, or our basic sound building block. Then we're going to set up what type of oscillator it is. We've got a few options: a sine tone, triangle tone, sawtooth tone, and a square tone. And then we can start that oscillator up. Now we've got a little bit of interaction here. I don't actually need those. I can just comment them out to start with, and we can do this, which is this is the hello world of computer music, just to play a sine tone. Let's see what it sounds like. Oh, that's annoying, isn't it? What about a triangle tone? I hope you can hear it. Did folks hear the sound, the sine tone just then? Here's another one. I've got it coming out of a speaker down here, which should go into my mic. I think it's also directly connected through OBS, but you never know. Here's the triangle tone. That one's a bit sharper, isn't it? What about sawtooth? These are in order of harshness: sine, triangle, sawtooth, and square. A little bit more harsh. Okay, you ready for the square tone? Yeah. The square tone sounds like the fire alarm, doesn't it? Boop, boop, boop. We'll do it again. Emergency, emergency. Evacuate now. Don't want to freak anyone out, but if that happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, you would be awake and out of your bed and out the front of the building and sad. And then angry with your friend who burnt the toast. Back to the smooth sine tone. Ah, so smooth, so relaxing. No one's getting out of bed for that. So we can create a basic sine tone, but what are we going to do to change it? What are we going to do to change it? We can, there's the basic synth parameters. We set the type. We've started and stopped it with the .start method. And we're now going to use these two other methods to change how high or low it is and how loud it should be. So this is an object that has functions attached. OSC is the object, and we can now use the .setType function of that object, which sets its own type. So the object is living there by itself. It's an oscillator that can generate sound. It's like you've just asked JavaScript to just like build a synthesizer and just plonk it down in the universe. And now when we use dot functions on that synthesizer, it's just referring to that specific synthesizer. So this specific oscillator, we changed the type to a sine tone, and then we started or turned on that specific synthesizer. Now in the draw loop, we can do some interaction. So we're not creating the sound in the draw loop, we're just changing it. So this, every time we do a draw loop, we'll look at where our mouse Y is and use that to change the frequency of the sound. And we'll also use our mouse X to change the amplitude of the sound. So let's try it. Whoop. You should be able to hear a very low sound and now a very high sound. Somewhere in the middle there. I can change the amplitude. You might hear it's got a few clicks there because I'm doing this in a slightly dodgy way using mouse interactions to change that sound. There's ways to clean up those clicks, which I'll probably talk about, maybe not this week, maybe after the mid-sem break. Okay, that's that little interaction. So we've just created an instrument, haven't we? We created an instrument with amplitude and frequency. Often we call this kind of demo a theremin. A theremin is this instrument which has two aerials. One aerial controls volume of an oscillator, and the other aerial controls the pitch of the oscillator. And you use your hands to being near those aerials, like this person, to activate the distance to those aerials changes the amplitude and frequency of the oscillator. But in P5 we don't have aerials, we just have our mouse. So that's a very simple little musical interaction, creating an instrument. If you want to know more about oscillators, and I'm sure you do, you've got to look at the reference. And this is where we get to things now where the reference is really important. You need to be able to look at the reference, understand it, read it carefully, read it slowly, see what's going on, and look at these examples to try to get things to work. So here's some example of an oscillator. There's a similar kind of demo example as I was just showing you. And then there's a lot of methods: start, stop, amplitude, get amp, freak, get frec, type, get type, connect, disconnect. We can connect the oscillator to other things, which is really handy. We can pan between left and right, get pan, change the phase, which is another aspect of the sound. How sounds interact is phase. We can add it to something else, or add a value to its output, multiply its output amplitude by a fixed volume, and change the way that its amplitude values react. So there's quite a few things we can do with an oscillator. What else can we do? Let's look at sampling. Ooh. Oh, I don't want sampling there. Go to this sampling. I think I updated these to use the Unilodge sound. Yeah, okay. So sampling, the first thing we've got to do is get our sound into P5. And this is the first time, the first day, in which we're loading up a sound into loading up some data into P5 that's not in your .js file. Loading data into P5 that's not in your .js file. So that introduces some complexities, because you've got to have your data somewhere. Now in your assignment templates, there will be an assets folder where you can put files that you want to be in your sketch, and then you can load them with some kind of line of code like this: load sound in quotation marks assets / and the name of your sound file. In the web editor, if you want to upload things, you have to upload files using this little menu over here. And then there's no assets folder. I guess I could make an assets folder, but I don't have an assets folder here. So we need to create a variable, unilog sound. Then I'm going to assign that variable to the sound which I've loaded. Load sound assets/unilog.mp3, the very same mp3 file I was showing you before on my phone. And then later on, we set its volume 0.5 and we can just play the sound file, which is a simple way to do it. We can just play back a sound file. Simple, but maybe boring. Well, let's try it in an example. I'll just comment some things out. I've got a few other samples here. I don't want those. You might notice that things look a little bit different around here today. Comment a few things out. We might need them later. I'm not going to delete them. There's my unilog sample. Unilog sample dot, what was it? Set volume. Yeah. Set volume. Unilog sample dot play. So you might notice that the oscillator had a start method and the sample has a play method. Okay, why are they different? I don't know. I didn't design it. Where is that sound file? What are the methods of sound file? It's definitely play. Yeah, play, plays it back. So it has a stop, but it doesn't have a start. It has play instead. Slightly confusing. Let's see if it works. Oh, there's my unilog sound file. Well, that's nice, isn't it? So we can play back a sound file and we can make a ooh sound. So we've got those two things we can do. Is there anything else we can do with these samples? What sounds can we make? Well, it depends on what sound file you load up. And this is one of the reasons I really love sampling as a way of creating sounds, because you can go around with your phone and collect sounds from the world around you and then have a whole library of different options of things to play back. And it's a bit more hard to make different kinds of sounds with oscillators. Just changing the type of the oscillator usually isn't enough to make a convincing difference, but you can change your sound file and everything about your sound changes. The mood of your artwork will change. So you have a lot of control just by changing the source material. If you run the play method, that will stop when the file ends, maybe, unless it's looping. If you want to change how high or low it is, you can use the .rate method. If you want to change the volume, you can press the set volume method. And again, note that the differences here between sound file and oscillator, unfortunately, they work a little bit differently. So you have to keep an eye on the reference. But how about we add some extra changes here? I'm just going to change the rate. Unilog sample.rate. It's going to be between 0 and 1 probably to start with. We'll just try this one, rate 0.5. That slowed it down significantly. What about 0.1? The way to think of a sample is, well, when we're dealing with samples, if you change the rate at which the frames are going by, it changes the speed of your sound, but also the pitch simultaneously. So if you've ever had an experience with a record where you've got a record player that has different speed settings, if you have a 33 RPM record on 45 RPM, it'll sound too high and fast. And if you have a 45 RPM record on 33 RPM setting, it will sound too slow and low. And some record players will have like a little speed adjustment so you can get the pitch of your sound exactly right. So this is very, very slow. Can we do minors? No. Maybe I'm playing from the wrong point. You can play sounds backwards. Maybe I can go above 1. Oh, now it sounds high and fast. What about 2? What about 10? Oops. So, we've got lots of options for our sounds, both our synthesized sounds and our sampled sounds. I've just shown you the very tiny scratches of the surface about how to make these things work. One thing I haven't explained is where I actually got the sound to be in P5, because you might have noticed this extra function, preload. So up here, I had setup, I had draw, I have mouse pressed, and I've also got preload. What's preload doing? What's preload doing? So we've already talked about the flow with setup and draw, but in some examples where you have to load data into your sketch, we have to have an extra function for that. We have to have a function which will load the data first before it even tries to run the setup part of the sketch. So that's why we have a preload function. It's specifically for loading in data. It's documented here in the ref. Preload, called directly before setup, preload function is used to handle asynchronous loading of external files. If a preload function is defined, setup will wait until any load calls within are finished. So this is great because it means we can load up data into our sketch, and the sketch is not going to start until the data is all there. Which is exactly what we want, because we don't want it to try to play sounds that haven't been loaded yet. That would lead to sadness and a broken sketch probably. So this is why we have to use the preload function whenever we're loading samples into our sketch. So in this example, I've got a couple of other samples ready. Synth sample, xylo sample, play back some of the synth sample slowly. And so it's loading these sounds before it even tries to start using the sketch. So here's a question. If I've got a sound file in my sketch, in my artwork, and I want to play it, where should I put unilog sound.play? Where should I put unilog sound.play? Someone got a suggestion in the comments? Haven't heard anyone. Ooh. Setup, good idea. So if we put play the unilog sound in setup, that means that at the start of our set, our artwork, as soon as it starts loading, it'll play back this sound. And if that's what we want, that's fine. There might be other things we want to happen, but this is a good choice. We definitely don't want to put it in preload, because preload is for loading the sound, not for playing it. So we don't want to mix those two things together. We could put it in setup. That means every time we start our sketch, it'll play, which is what I've done here. Where you don't want to put it is in draw. And I've seen too many students do this. They put their thing in draw. And they think, what's happening? I guess it sounds kind of cool. But what's happening is that every time it draws a frame, 60 frames per second, it starts playing back another copy of the synth sample. And P5 sound works a little bit weirdly. I wish it didn't do this, but every time you run .play, it kind of makes a new version of it. Very irritating. So we don't want to play our sounds back in draw unless we have a very, very specific control flow, if then else's, to make sure it only happens once. We could play it in mouse pressed or under some other interaction, right? So you might, in your workstation, it might be that you pick up something, you pick up the phone, and it plays a telephone sound. I don't know. I just made that up, but it would be pretty rewarding interaction. You would understand the telephone concept. So if I press the mouse, and every time I press it, it plays another one. Well, that's going to be pretty annoying too. I probably would like to have some logic here to check that it's not already playing. If, look in the reference for sound file, if is playing, dot is playing, but I want the opposite of that. If not playing, whoops, then play. I don't know why I keep getting quotation marks. So it's not playing right now. If I click the mouse, well, it hasn't worked. Is that the right thing? Oh, is playing is not it's a function. I always have to look at the refs. I thought it was a property, but it's not. It's a function. So I need to put the opening and closing brackets there. There it goes. So we wait until we get to the end of that one. Might end one of these days. A long sound. Oh, it stopped. Okay, now I can start it again. So you have to do a little bit of, add a little bit of if then else logic to make sure that your sounds don't play over the top of each other. So this is a good way to do that simply. Now here's the thing, and you will have seen in the assignments that I add some maybe strict rules about what you're supposed to do in terms of images and sounds. And so far, at this point, loading up images and loading up sounds into your artworks has been banned. Just don't do it, because I wanted you to learn to draw in P5 and use your own skills with creating images creating artworks that way. And in assignment 2, you're not supposed to use sound. You're only allowed to use sound in assignment 3. And in assignment 3, you must not load image. You can use image, I'll change that. But you must not include images unless you've created them yourself or they come from freesound.org. So I've got some limitations there. I'm still deciding exactly how to handle that, but basically, I really want you to create your own sound files. And everybody has a phone. So it doesn't really matter what kind of phone you have, it will be able to record sounds. They all can do it. Really, for the last 10 or 15 years, they've been able to do this. So recording sounds is not a problem. Go find sounds around you, where you live, where you are, whatever sounds you can find, and use that in your artwork. As an alternative, under some circumstances, you can use sounds that are strictly from a Creative Commons licensed website. I really hope that you internalize this concept, but I'm looking for sounds that you recorded yourself. So I think I'll change that requirement in assignment 3. I want you to record your own sounds somehow, with your laptop, with your phone, with your computer, with a camera. If you've got a huge recording set up for field recording, use that, but you don't need it. Rest of the p5.sound library, there are lots of other things in that library. Filter, delay, reverb for changing, processing sounds. Envelope shapes sounds over time. There's an object for looking at the audio spectrum called FFT. There's an object called audio in. You can have a guess about how that would work. And there's more complicated instruments, whole instruments that are built with many or several oscillators and other processors. So one example is monosynth and another example is polysynth. Someone asked, can we record instrument sound that we play? Yes, please do. I've got one here from an instrument I played. What is it? The Xylo. We'll do Xylo here, Xylo there, whoops. Someone's saying, if I design sounds, can I do that stuff for assignment 3? As long as it's interactive? Yeah, it's something to discuss further because assignment 3 is not released yet, but I would suggest that I'm asking you to make sound in P5. If you're making a really complicated sound in some other software, then I would be careful about how much you rely on that and not about other interactive sounds you're making in P5. I don't know what that is. Something's called Serum. What is that? Ugh. What even is Serum? This is very millennial of me to not know what this is. Is it a synth engine? Is that what we're looking at? I don't know. You have to tell me what it is for me to understand the question, really. But yeah, sure, if you've got some skills in sound design, you can certainly, or skills in developing audio outside of P5, you can certainly use those. But we're really looking for things that are interactive as well. So you can't just create a 3-minute composition outside of P5, plonk it in your P5 sketch, have it play back with one .play message and expect that to be great, because the requirement is for a sonic artwork. So it's where the interaction drives the sound, not just the sound that you've previously designed. Okay. So, now does everyone know everything there is to know about sound? Sadly not. We do have a whole course on computer music that you can take if you want to in a later time. It's a 4,000 level course, so probably if you're here as a first year, it'll be a little while before you get up to that, but a big computer music course coming soon. But now you know how to make basic synthesis and sampled sounds in P5. So we're going to make something a little bit more complicated. I've got some examples here. What am I going to do? Which example shall I have? I might get my sound files and play with them a little bit more, because that's where I think there's a lot of fun to be had. So first thing I will do, I'll just get rid of this Xylo sample and get rid of this bit. We're not going to have that kind of interaction. I'll set up my Unilodge to be a loop, I think. Unilodge sample dot set loop, and that one can be true. Whoops, lowercase t. So I'm making sure that the Unilodge sample loops, and I'll play it back. So now the Unilodge sample plays. When it gets to the end, it will keep playing. It will never stop. What am I going to do with that Unilodge sample? Well, what I might like to do is change how the Unilodge sample plays over time. So what I'm going to do is change it in a repetitive way using, well, I'll just start with the mouse location. That should be fun. Unilodge sample dot rate mouse x divided by width. So it's going to go between 0 and 1 based on my location in x of my mouse. So now it's quiet because it's not moving at all. So now it's something which is quite interactive, isn't it? Well, that's cool. But I might like this to happen regularly in my sketch without too much other stuff having to be done. So I might just set up some kind of process so that the rate of my sound playback is happening automatically. So a neat way to do that is with frame count. Just as you were doing with your monster using frame count to make a process dynamic, we can do this with sound. So I'm going to make a variable called speed, and speed is going to be sine of frame count divided by 200. I've got an example I'm referring to because this is a bit complicated for me to remember, but sine is going to create a number between -1 and 1 based on whatever you put in it. And we can change the value or the speed at which it moves by changing how fast we move through numbers as the parameter for sine. So in this instance, I'm going to change unilog samples rate to be this speed. And we can hear it moving, changing over time. It's going down and slower, slower, slower. And then it'll get very slow, and then it'll start going backwards. Now it's going backwards. So to emphasize that we know what's going on, I'm just going to make a little ellipse just to track this sound through time. So I'll make the ellipse sit in the center of the, or somewhere near the center, start in the center, and then I'll add something plus the speed, or width times speed. Speed's between 0 and 1, I see, so it can now go all the way to the right or all the way to the left. Width times speed, and then I'll put it right in the middle of my sketch, and it'll just be a 50 by 50 circle. So I'm using this variable speed both to change the sound and to create some visual thing. Is the circle moving? So there's my unilog sample, and I guess what I've done so far is create a kind of backing sound with that little soundtrack. And now I'd like to do something with the mouse. So I'm just going to make a very simple kind of interaction here, but I'm going to use the mouse to play back that synth sample wherever I click at different times. So what I'll say is synth sample dot jump, and I'm going to use the jump method, which moves to a random place in that synth sample. So I've got a fairly long sound file there. I just want to play a random place every time I say jump. And so I'll go between random from 0 to a number, and the number, I'll just figure out this out. Get duration or duration. It returns the duration of a sound file in seconds. So I want a random number between 0 seconds and the maximum time. Synth sample dot duration, 2 ends there, there's 1 end too many. And I'd also like a random speed. Was this the right indentation? There we go. Synth sample dot rate random, -1, +1, -1.5, +1.5. We could go faster than normal. And then the last thing, I'll just make it actually play. So there's our Unilodge happening. I might just turn the Unilodge down. Unilodge sample dot amp 0.5. Turn the Unilodge down a bit. So that's in the background. Here's the, I hope, the synth. Oh, there's some. I'm probably still getting that issue with the synth sample playing too many times. So I'll put in that if synth sample dot is playing. I always forget these. If it's already playing, it just jumps to a random place and keeps going. So this is fine, but there's something I'd like to add to this synth sample. I'd like to change its volume over time. And what we sometimes use to do that is called an envelope. And this is where things get a little bit more, more detailed in terms of sound design. Where are my slides about this? Oh yeah, amplitude envelope. It's just at the right place. How good am I? Knowing about what I need to know and having it in the next slide. So the amplitude is the volume of our note. But when we think of notes, musical notes, the volume will actually change over time. So before the musical note, the volume is 0, right? It's quiet. Then when the musical note happens, do, the volume will go up. And then at the end of the musical note, do, the volume will stop, so it'll go back to 0. But usually when people play musical instruments in particular, the volume changes sort of smoothly over time. So we get more of a volume curve. And that is what we call an envelope in music. So there's a volume curve going up and then going down over time. And we can divide this volume curves into different phases. The first phase we call attack, and the second phase we call release in this diagram. We can have extra phases, but these are just two, attack release or attack decay, two phases to make a kind of shape for our musical note to live within. And in synthesis lingo, we have a thing called an envelope generator, which makes envelopes. And all an envelope generator is doing really is holding a volume knob and turning it up and down. So we're going to take our synth sound from our synth sample, send it into a envelope generator, which has a volume control for it, starts at 0, turns it up, and then turns it down again. You can make more complicated envelopes, and this is the attack release was the simple kind. There's a slightly more complicated kind called ADSR. I just mention this because often in sound framework documentation, the word envelope and the word ADSR kind of get put together. So the ADSR has 2 extra phases. We started just with attack and release, those 2 phases. The ADSR has a sort of holding phase, the sustain phase. So you might hit a key on a keyboard, have an initial attack where the sound goes da, and then it fades down a bit, da, and then you release your key and stops. So there's a little fade out, little fade, just after the attack, and then the sustain is like key held down. So attack, decay, sustain, release. This is a classic kind of envelope for a pitched sound, specifically related to keyboards, really. It makes a lot of sense to play sounds this way, with a little bit of a volume kick at the start, just so you know the sounds have started. Okay. How am I going to do this in P5? Well, luckily, in P5.sound, I have an envelope. So an envelope is a series of fades over time, often used to control an object's output gain level as an ADSR envelope. Luckily, I already told you what that is. It can also modulate other parameters, which is handy for more advanced kind of synthesizers. Let's just show this example. Oh, there's a nice envelope. So every time I click here, there's a little fade in and a little fade out. And now I can play it like an instrument, play rhythms. So we're going to basically follow this formula in this example. We'll make a variable for our envelope, let env. Then we'll create a new P5 envelope, and we've got to give it its parameters. The first parameter is the time for that attack phase. There's going to be the time there. There's a time for the decay phase. The sustain phase doesn't have a time, that's as long as you're holding the note. So it tends to have a level, sort of a percentage. That might be like 75% of the maximum. That's 0, 100%, the level there, and then the release time. So you release the note, that's how long it takes to fade out another time. That's what they're telling me right in the oh yeah, L1. That's the attack level. Decay time, decay level. What? I'm confused now. Time until envelope reaches attack level, good. Level 1's attack is complete, okay. Time until envelope reaches decay level. So decay level is the sustain level. I always have to go back to the diagram to match up my expectations here. Every different sound library does this differently. Okay, so I'm going to put in an envelope. It's easy to make it, not so easy to use it. So we'll try making it first. And it's going to be our envelope. Not in preload, we want it down here in regular load. Env equals new p5.envelope. And we're going to have to put in some parameters. So what parameters did I use before in the one I made earlier? Didn't use any envelope parameters. Why did I do that? I'm just going to use the default parameters. That'll probably work. If we need different parameters, we'll change them later. So now, here's the trick. Here's the trick. When I want my sample to be controlled by an envelope, I need it to behave like it's always playing. So I'm going to change it so that it's, first of all, looping, second of all, playing, and third of all, have 0 volume. So synth sample dot set loop true. Sample dot amp 0. So my sample is never going to play. I'll get rid of this stuff. I don't need that to play back inside press start in the mouse pressed anymore. So I'm treating this like treating my sound file like it's an oscillator now. It's just going to loop and always be making sound, but we can't hear it. And that's the way it should be. So there's my, if I play now, click around, I'm not making any sound because the amplitude is 0. Last thing I need to change is the envelope's input. So I say env.set input synth sample. So it's like I've made 2 different modules here. I've made a sound source and I've made a sound processor, and the envelope is the sound processor. I'll give you an example of things being plugged together. This always reminds me, this kind of thing, of the way that we deal with analog sounds. in electronic music. So I've got here some effects pedals for guitars or other instruments, and we'd have a guitar and it would make a sound, and then we plug it in over here to something, and we take the output of this effect, metal zone, and plug that into some other effect, take the output, plug it into the delay, etc., etc., get to the output, plug that into a speaker. So we're plugging different things together, and that's exactly what we do in P5 to make sound. You take a sound creator, like a sampler or a oscillator, and you will plug it into different kinds of processors. This might be all I have to do. Oh no, I need to do one more thing. So far, so good. I've got my sample, I've got my envelope, but I need my envelope to start sometime. I think I need to press trigger attack. Trigger release. What are my options here? What do I do over there? I just play. So I could, I've got a few options here. I could press trigger attack, which will be sort of putting my finger down on the piano. I could go trigger release, or if I press play, then it will just go up and down, I think. I don't know. We'll give it a go. Like I said, all of these, I haven't been working in P5. I haven't worked in P5 since this time last year doing this, so I forget in between having used other systems. So when I click my mouse, I want that envelope to play, env.play. And I might just tell the Unilog to keep quiet, amplitude 0, so I know what's going on. So there's no Unilog right now. Oh, there's my sound file's working. Every time I click. So I think this is what this is doing a very quick attack and release. So that's an envelope. Well, that's pretty cool. I might bring back my Unilog sound and we can hear them together. Where is Unilog? I might keep it quite quiet. There's a little experiment. Let's keep going. We've got a few more different techniques and a little bit more sound art to talk about before we stop to. So I led with the sampled sounds because, broadly speaking, it's easier to get sampled sounds to make a cool piece of music quickly. If you want synthesized sounds to sound cool, you tend to have to do a bit more work combining them together. So if we want to make a complicated sound with oscillators, we typically need more than one. Just one oscillator tends not to cut it. It's often a good idea to add two things together so that we go from some boring sound waveform like that to something a little bit more interesting like this one. And sine tones are actually one of the more boring tones. If you're starting out with tones, try a triangle wave not a square wave, a sawtooth wave. They tend to be a bit easier to hear sometimes. The square tone is a bit too grating usually. You can add different tones together to make complicated sounds. Another thing you can do is adjust the sound using a filter. So we might use a filter to essentially remove sound or remove particular frequencies from a sound to reshape the waveform. So start with a square wave like that. If we apply a filter called a low pass filter, it will tend to smooth off the legs of the square tone. over time. And this is really typical for a synthesizer when you're creating sounds from scratch, to have some oscillators with a triangle wave or a sawtooth wave, maybe 2 or 3 oscillators added together, and then have a filter that removes the sound and shapes it. Then you'll have an envelope to change the amplitude, and you might also have an envelope controlling the filter's frequency to give that sound a little bit of shape over time. So this is, someone in the chat was talking about sound design. Well, this is how we do sound design, combining different elements of sound creation and using them together to create a cool sound over time. Another kind of synthesis you can do is called frequency modulation synthesis, and this, I think, is the last thing I'll talk about, last sort of computer music technique I'll talk about today before we do some more experiments. But you can use one sound as the input to another sound. So we might have an oscillator with a frequency input, and we've got a frequency that we're looking for, a target frequency. It might be 440, which is like A, the classic tuning note for an orchestra. And then we add a changing value to that input frequency, and we can add another sound wave that's moving up and down, changing that frequency over time. And if you do that, you get a really wild sound effect. So you get some really complicated synthesized sounds really quickly. Frequency modulation is a really popular method of synthesizing interesting sounds. It's cool because you can get a very wide range of sounds with a small number of oscillators, so it's sort of computationally cheap. Every oscillator you add uses more CPU processing power. So it's popular for that reason. It was particularly famous in the 80s with a particular synthesizer called a DX7. And actually, I don't have a DX7, but I've got a modern toy kind of recreation of a DX7 sound engine here. This is an FM synthesizer called a Korg Volker FM. So we'll do some more oscillators, add some oscillators to our existing work and see where we get to. Ooh, wonder if I got my oscillator example somewhere. I'll add a couple of oscillators here. So we don't need to do these in preload because we're not loading data, but we might need to make a few oscillators in the setup. So I'll say, let osc, make 2 actually, let osc and let osc2, because I'm going to do some additive synth. Osc equals new p5 dot oscillator, and I'll make them both triangle waves. One of my favorite waves, I suppose. What's your favorite waveform? Tell me in the chat. Osc.frequency. Oh, I need to work out a good frequency for these oscillators to be. So osc.frec equals 176. And what's your favorite frequency? 176. Do you know the musical note attached to that frequency? Someone could tell me, or a close approximation. This first one's going to be osc.freq. Going to have amplitude 0. I'm setting these up to send them through another envelope. Someone tell me their favorite frequency. Someone says sine wave. If you do sine waves, they just fade into the background. I can't hear them. They're hard. You need more. I need more frequency information. Yeah, and avoid square tone. Fire alarm PTSD is no good. Oh, I lost my example because someone talked at me. That's fine. And start it up. So I'm going to putting these ones through an envelope, same as before. Oh. So I want them to be set to amplitude 0 and starting. Make another one. This one's osc2. But I'm going to make it a different frequency. 2 times osc.frec. Now I'm going to make env2. I'll give it a more descriptive name. How about synth env? So synth env equals new p5 dot envelope, And this time I'm going to give it some, I'll set it up with some ADSR values. So I'll do synth env dot sets ADSR, 0.1 attack, 0.1, that should be the attack level, right? What's the reference for that? Set ADSR, our attack time, decay time, the ratio of the sustain, and then the release time. So that's what I was expecting to set, the normal ordering. So attack time is 0.1 seconds, decay time is 0.1 seconds, sustain time is 80%, sustain ratio is 80% or 0.8, and the release time 0.5 seconds. So it's a fairly long release on that, which is a nice thing to do. And we're going to set our input for our synth env to be both oscillators, OSC1 and OSC2. Cool. Okay, well now what? Now what? I guess what we would like to do is to play back our oscillator. So I'm going to stop, not play back the original sound file when I press the mouse, but play back my oscillator instead. So synth-env.play, and I'd just like to hear it, so we're going to press go. That's very boring, isn't it? I might need to do some more work to make it something cool. So I'll make another OSC frequency, a random frequency between 35 Hertz and 450, so it's pretty low frequency, and I'll set up my frequency for those two oscillators. Now, I could just do this, but that might lead to a click because it's changing the frequency of my oscillator immediately, and oscillators don't like to do that, or digital oscillators don't like to do that. You'll end up with a kind of jaggy edge in the waveform. And if you have a single little jaggy edge in a waveform in digital audio, we hear it. Humans are really good at hearing little jaggy edges. If you have a little imperfection in your visuals, we can often just tune it out. But this is one of those things about sound, like demanding attention. We can't tune out the little jaggy edge when we're talking about audio. So we're going to change the frequency, but we're going to do it over time. OSC freak. So this is what I could have. We'll just see how it works. You might hear the click. Bit of a little click there, but if I put in an extra parameter, that's the number of seconds the time the change will take. I can make it long, or about 0.5. You'll definitely hear it now. So now I've got it gliding. That's actually kind of cool. I'll leave it there. No matter how far it is, it's 0.5 seconds, so it's not gliding at a constant rate. It's gliding as fast as it needs to go to get to that next frequency in 0.5 seconds. And at the moment, what I've done is added 2 times my initial frequency. If you know about frequencies and pitches on an instrument, you might know that on a piano, for instance, there's lots of notes that all play a tone we call C, and there are different Cs that are different octaves, and those tones sound very similar to us as humans, but they're different pitches, right? Some are high, some are low. What's the difference between them? Well, they're all doubling of the previous pitch. So C, the C above middle C is double the frequency, the next C is double that frequency. So if you multiply a pitch by 2, you get 1 octave above. And it just so happens that mixing those 2 sounds, getting two oscillators and mixing them together in an octave, sounds pretty good. If we just did 1, it's hard to do 1, but what I'll do now is, rather than mix them together, in the 2 times frequency. I'm going to have a tunable variable for my frequency difference. Let, I'm going to call it detune, or I'll call it ratio. Let synth ratio equal 1.05. That's pretty close, isn't it? Doesn't that sound cool? What about even closer? What about further away, 1.5? Almost 2, but not quite. A little bit further away. So a lot of hardware synthesizers, an analog synth, will have a big dial, which is the ratio between 1 or 2 or 3 oscillators built into that synthesizer. So you can use that dial to get an interesting tone. I'll go back to 1.03. I think that's a really nice value. I think that sounds cool. Okay, so I've got my moving ball, got my synth ratio. I've got more of this lecture, but I really want to keep making cool sound and music, so we might do the sound art bit next time in week 7. What else do I want? I really want to add a filter, so I'll delay for a few minutes. I might do some of the sound art now. I think we'll choose on reflection. I'd like to do sound art now, but I would also like to add a filter. So I'm going to go to where's my reference tag? Where's a filter? New P5.band pass. Is that the only kind of filter? I want a low pass filter. So they're all kind of the same design. I've forgotten how to use filters in P5, if I ever knew, so I'm kind of live coding from scratch here. I'm going to say synth filter. Make these both sawtooth. So they're have a bit more information. And synth filter equals new P5 dot. No, not filter, it's a low pass filter. Is that what it was called? Low pass. So a low pass filter, it's a classic kind of filter in synth design which removes some high frequencies. So if you've got one of those situations with the fire alarm sound, the square wave, or the really harsh saw wave, you can definitely chill that out a little bit, muffle the high frequencies, still get the low frequencies, and get a really interesting, rich sound. So that's what we use a low pass filter for. Let's look back at the results of how to do this. So we still want we're going to set it up with a frequency. No, where's the frequency? We need to set our frequency for our filter, and then we need to set a resonance for the filter. There's 2 parameters for it. Synth filter dot, I've already forgotten this. Dot frec and dot res. Frec is going to be, I don't know, I guess 400, and synth filter dot res. What's that supposed to be between? I'll set it to 10. I think 50 seems crazy. And then what do? I want to set my input, synth filter dot set input to OSC and OSC2. If I get this wrong, which I might, I'll have to fix it, but we'll set the the filter to have input from the oscillators, and then the envelope will have input from the filters. That's what's going to happen. Synth filter. Uh-oh. Set input is not a function, so we lost my filter. How do we use it? I've forgotten how to use filters. I've forgotten how to use computers. Help me. Noise.start, but where does it set it to? Oh, noise.connect filter. Okay. Maybe I'm not allowed to mix things like that with a filter. Okay, I'll use the connect to not sure this is going to work. Still not right. Error connecting to node. Oh no, I forgot how to do it. I thought I was going to be okay, and then I wasn't. P5.effect. Input, output, dry, wet. Okay. I'd like to mix some sounds, please. Back to sound. Filter the frequency range of a sound. Well, I'll just use one of these oscillators. How about that? No, the oscillator is supposed to connect to the filter. It's the opposite way. Yeah. Okay, noise.connect filter. This is where computer music gets confusing. So my filter exists, and now I change osc.connect to synth filter. We'll see if that works. Okay, so far so good. I'll see if I can get the other one as well. Just have a very low... That should cut the sound out if it's actually going through it. That's not working. Seems to be making a difference, but not a huge one. So this one, they make some noise, make a filter. Noise.disconnect. Okay, so both the OSCs have to be disconnected from everywhere else. When you make one of these synthesis objects, they start out automatically connected to the speaker. So I'm disconnecting them from the speaker and connecting them instead to the filter. There we go, that's the filtered sound. Oh, I like that one. I don't think I've ever done this before in P5, so I'm happy with myself. Make it a really low frequency. You can see it removes most of the information then. That's cool, isn't it? So we've got a filter, we've got an envelope, we've got a background kind of sound effect, and we've got some filters doing some cool stuff. That's 11:53. What else should I do? Should I add another envelope to my filter? I think I should. I think I'll save the next half of the sound and music lecture for week 7, because what we're doing right now is too fun, and sound is something which is tricky. So folks, you have a whole assignment about making a sound artwork, and I just want to make sure that people are aware of the details and have a few weeks to process it. So I'm going to go back, get some more space here. I'm going to make another envelope. That is going to be filter env, and we'll see if we can get a filter envelope working. So it's going to change the frequency of the filter over time to give us a really cool changing sound. Filter env equals new p5.envelope. In fact, I'm going to copy all the stuff in a minute. Envelope. Filter env. But it's going to be a bit tricky because I want to connect it to a filter. So how do I do that? Go back to the envelope part of the reference. You can also modulate other parameters, but how? How do you do it? Sorry about I'll stop my sound. You've probably gotten used to this nice background sound, but I'd like to modulate some other parameters right now. So I'm going to figure out how to do that. Assign a parameter to be controlled by this envelope. So I think I need to assign it to, am I still on envelope? I think I need to assign the input to be the frequency of the filter. So before I was just setting input to be the oscillator, and the default thing that it's controlling is the output volume of those oscillators. But I want it to be controlling the frequency of the filter. So I'll try this. synthFilt.fric. And we'll see if that works. And I will need to actually scale add. Ah. I'm not sure if that's going to work, but I need something to make sure it's in the right range. I'll try this. I'll just see what happens now. Does it complain? No, it's not happy. P5.envelope. Well, that's because I missed an E. That's why it's not happy. Oh. This biquad.frequency.value. I feel like I need another more complicated example. Should we look in examples? Sound, load play, sound effects, measuring amplitude, oscillator frequency, filter low pass. Look at that example and see how it works. That doesn't use an envelope. Have to keep finding these. These ones don't have an envelope. That's not so useful. Well, that's cool, but not what I wanted. I might be out of time for this one. I'll have to work on it again after the holidays. M.play noise. Interesting. This one's not connecting, is it? There's not many good examples about how to do this. Oh well. If I can work out, I've got 2 minutes to work it out, and if I can't do it, it'll have to wait until the next lecture, or I'll send you a note on the forum about it. Sound of T envelope was what I wanted. Oh, a P5 can control an oscillator's frequency. Ah, okay, maybe I need to do it that way. Not set input, but change the frequency to be controlled by that. Filt env. Okay, hasn't crashed. Not making any sounds because it's going to be very, very small numbers. Filt env dot mult. I'm going to make it multiply by 1,000, and then I'm going to make that filter envelope start play when I go down here. So it's playing the oscillator envelope and the filter envelope. Now I'll make it slower. Now you get a bit more of the filter sound. Cool, so I've got 2 envelopes now, one controlling 2 different controls. One is the frequency of the filter, one is the volume of my oscillator and oscillator 2, and that gives me this little squeaky synth sound that sounds cool when I move around and click around the screen. I'm sure I could do some more interesting interactive parts here. I'm just generating random numbers right now, which is not super exciting. It's cool and fun, but it's not very exciting. Probably not a very rewarding interaction. You might have to do a bit more work. But this lecture is really about how to use sounds, how to create them, what kind of sounds you can use in P5, and this code's available for you to play with, as well as all of the examples that are in our labs and in the P5 manual. So I'm really hoping, it's a challenge this year. I set you folks a challenge to do an assignment basically about sound, mainly about sound and how to use that in P5. So you'll need to use these tools to come up with some fun, interesting sounds. Okay, so at this point, I will stop my thing in a minute and catch you. It is week 6, which means we now have 2 weeks break. Your assignment 2 is due Monday, next Monday, first week of the mid-semester break. I'll catch you again on Monday in week 7, after the mid-semester break. Until then, folks, have a great time. Keep making cool art. See you around.